We're on. Hey everybody, this is Chris, producer of Unstuck, an OCD kids movie, and I'm really happy for OCD Week. We've had a lot of fun, did a lot of different things with the film, and today is going to be something really fun. We have Brian, who is the author of
Unraveling Rose.
It's a children's book. It came out when?
Fall of last year it was released.
So it's been out kind of the same time that Unstuck has been out. And it just so happened that we connected a month ago at a big book fair in Brooklyn and found out that we're like basically on the same block. So it's such a small world. And I thought, hey, I'm looking for things to do for OCD Week. You want to come over to my house and hang out and we'll do a reading?
I jumped on it. Yeah, absolutely.
So it seemed like a lot of fun. And what I figured we would do is we just talk for a few minutes, and then I'll turn it over to Brian, and he'll read the book. So if you want to grab your kids or get an idea of what the book's about, gather around the iPad or gather around the iPhone, and you can listen to Brian, and he'll talk about the story. And then afterwards, I'll put links in the comments so you can get the book from Amazon.
Direct from the publisher, which is Schiffer Publishing. It's available through Barnes & Noble online.
Get it anywhere.
Multiple sites, yeah.
That's cool. That's the great thing about today. I mean, literally, you can buy the book while we're talking. Yeah. And I'm just going to share what we're doing right now so that the Unstuck group can see it. So just talk for a second about what inspired Unraveling Rose.
Well, I was a lot like Rose, the bunny in the book, when I was a young boy. And then when I had children, one of my daughters developed OCD. We saw symptoms when she was around 6. So I thought to myself that it might be worthwhile to write a children's book that could be used as a conversation starter for parents that might see signs that their children are exhibiting of OCD.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So there's like a personal history, family history, personal history, kind of similar here with Unstuck.
Yeah.
And how long did it take you to, compile and write the book?
It's a 600-word book, so it didn't take long to write, but I did refine it a lot. I did a fair amount of research. I wanted to make sure I was getting things right. And with 600 words, you have to be very succinct and concise and convey big ideas in a small space.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do as much research as possible to make sure I was getting things right. And then once we were happy with the story, I began working with an illustrator, and it took her about 4 months to do the art.
And the illustrator is?
Shiloh Penfield, and I am so happy to get to work with her. She's amazing.
And Shyla is also in Brooklyn.
She is. She's about 2 blocks that way.
So we have a nice little Brooklyn community. It's funny that you connect. I was telling somebody at the OCD Foundation today, like, I go to these conferences that are not near my home to find all the people who live in my area. There's somebody who works up in the Pandas Action Network, and she lives like, we were just telling Brian, like, he can see her from his window. So there's a small community here in Brooklyn that's all OCD based, and slowly but surely we're all kind of getting together. So the last thing I was going to say is, so you write the book, you find a publisher?
Yes.
And then they bring in the illustrator?
No, actually, I found Shiloh before Schiffer agreed to do the book. And she did sketches and did some basic art, and then ultimately they signed off on it. And then she proceeded to illustrate the rest of the book.
Oh, cool. So you kind of had some test illustrations.
Yes.
And how many illustrations did you have of Rose? Like,
how many in general?
Yeah, like before you found...
Shiloh, after she read the story, sent me a sheet with, like, I'd say 15 different variations on Rose, and said, what do you think? And I said, ooh, I love the body of number 4, but I really like the face of number 10. And then she compiled those and did it again, and then she worked with finding the right coloring. And so that was essentially the process.
Well, we have a quick prototype that Brian bought, and maybe you can grab it and show it. If you want to share this out, we're going to do the reading of Unraveling Rose in maybe like 2 minutes. But you get to see.
This is Rose, and this is actually was created by Shiloh. This rose is felt, and this rose travels with me everywhere I go. She's a very busy bunny. We've been to lots of fun places, but yeah, Rose goes everywhere with me.
That's really cute.
Yeah.
Can I see it?
Yeah, of course.
Look at her. Say hi to Rose. No, that looks better in the light. Isn't this adorable? Hello.
And rumor has it, Schiffer, the publisher, is working on a plushie that will eventually be able to accompany the book.
Oh, that's great. So it'll be like a set.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Where have you, so before we're going to read it in a minute, but before that, you know, you get the book, it's released. Were you immediately contacted by parents? How has the response been?
The response has been really good. The reviews for the story have been good. And I've got letters sent to me from parents saying how special the book has become to them, and how they wish they'd had a book like that when they were kids, and how it has made it possible for them to speak to their kids about what's going on. And that's been really heartwarming, because that was the whole point of really writing the book in the first place.
Right, you're making a connection, and you're able to kind of, if you're able to reach the family and the kids, and how, you know, your book helps them understand what's going on in their head, or, you know, they can identify with Rose or the story or what happens to her, all the better.
Absolutely. I think, you know, being the parent of a child with OCD, I know that those first few times when you're trying to figure out what's happening and you're trying to get conversations going because you don't fully understand, right? It can be difficult. So having something to basically be a catalyst for that conversation can ease that process, I hope.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Speaking of that, let's get to Rose. So just give us a second. We're going to reconfigure a little bit, and so we can make sure that we can see the book, and Brian's going to read it. All right.
Okay.
Might have to just hold it up a little high. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, everybody, this is Unraveling Rose, and I hope you enjoy it. Rose was sewn together with love. She was named for the color of her flannel cheeks. She could have been named Cotton for her tail or Floppy for her long ears, but Rose was named Rose, and she liked that. She loved the little boy who held her tightly at bedtime. She loved when the little boy climbed trees with her or tossed her high in the air and caught her. But Rose's most favorite thing was reading stories with the boy. It was her job to turn the pages, and Rose loved that. Life was just the way she wanted it, and Rose did everything she could to keep it that way. If the books on the shelf weren't straight, Rose wanted to straighten them. At tea time, Rose made sure all the teacups' handles pointed to the right. And there wasn't a single wrinkle on her polka dot dress. Rose made sure that everything was perfect. Then, one sunny Sunday morning, Rose discovered just under her left arm a tiny loose thread dangling free. Well, that shouldn't be there, she thought. Knowing that little loose thread was dangling, Rose found it hard to concentrate on painting a picture, or building towers with her blocks, or even reading stories with the boy. That loose thread was all she could think about. Finally, Rose had to fix it. Pinching the thread firmly, she pulled, but it didn't come out. The thread just got longer. When she tugged again, the thread kept coming and opened up a tiny hole. Rose could see a gap of white stuffing. Oh no, Rose sighed. So the stuffed bunny left the thread alone for a time. But it didn't take long before the thought of that dangling thread filled her mind, and Rose pulled at it again and again and again and again, and the string grew longer, and the little hole where she could see her white stuffing grew larger. Rose tried to hide the length of string in the pocket of her dress. She was embarrassed by what she was doing, and she didn't want anybody to see. Still, Rose couldn't stop. Now, when the boy tossed her in the air, Rose was worried that the ball of thread would tumble from her pocket. Still, Rose couldn't stop pulling the thread. She kept pulling at the thread until her arms started to really unravel and some of the stuffing fell out. Rose put on a sweater to cover the hole, but her left arm wouldn't work at all. Nearly all the stuffing was gone. She didn't want to paint pictures anymore or climb trees, but worst of all, without both of her hands, Rose couldn't turn pages. When the boy asked if she wanted to read stories together, Rose sadly shook her head no. That one unraveling thread kept Rose from doing the things she loved most. She needed to make a big change. Rose put back her stuffing, threaded a needle, and stitch by stitch carefully sewed herself together. When she was finished and the hole was fixed, the little loose thread was still dangling. And that was okay. With practice, Rose forgot the thread was there. The more she didn't pull, the more she didn't have to pull. The more she and the boy could read their stories together. The more she understood that things don't always have to be perfect. The more room there was in Rose's head to do the things she loved and to feel loved. And that's the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
I just think the idea of unraveling, let me just fix this for a second. The idea of unraveling and unraveling a thread, it was just a really fun way to kind of explain OCD. Because it really does feel like, at least from my experience, what happened with my daughter, it was like, it wasn't just one thing.
Yeah.
It was like all these other things at once, and you like, for a while it was like, wow, I can't keep track. There seems to be a new thing every day.
Right.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. So was that the first idea you had? Was that like the light bulb that went off? And
Absolutely. I knew I wanted to write a book about OCD. And I had, out of nowhere, just came to me randomly, I had a flash, an image of a stuffed bunny pulling at a thread. And because it wasn't, I had the thought not in association with like working on writing something, I thought, why on earth would this bunny keep pulling at a thread? And I thought, and then it took me only a second to realize, oh, because she can't help it, right? So I went from there.
So one of the interesting things too about hearing the book and knowing where it came from is that Brian has OCD.
Yeah.
He has a daughter with OCD. Mm-hmm. So there's a family connection. So did you write some of your experiences or your family's experiences into the book?
It was Rose's symptoms were more based on my symptoms. I had, as a child, had an overwhelming fear of making mistakes and an intense need for things to be perfect. Anything I did needed to look perfect, needed to sound perfect, needed to feel perfect, and I was very afraid of making mistakes. I didn't have an association of fear with my symptoms. I was never worried that there would be harm to myself or to anyone else if things weren't perfect. But it did lead to a sort of compulsion where I would seek reassurance. I overthought things, rethought things to the point where I just was sort of paralyzed. I would just end up giving up or not doing something. And ultimately what it led to, especially as I got older, was I just began avoiding things or procrastinating because I knew that engaging in something was going to result in an overwhelming sort of sense of that panic about it being perfect.
You had to start something, and you couldn't just do it or make it
Yeah.
just good. It had to be absolutely perfect in your
Yeah.
head. Did you have an idea, remembering back, what that perfect was? Going through drafts and drafts, let's say, of a report or doing a drawing, like, okay, this is now perfect.
I can recall there would be multiple things. It would be, and my mother and I have talked about this since. As early as kindergarten or first grade, wouldn't leave the house unless my hair looked just right. It could be that, or it could be I was drawing a picture and I just wouldn't be happy with it. I'd keep drawing it and drawing and drawing, and and if it wasn't perfect, I would become very anxious and frustrated and respond like that.
I'm curious if you, just using drawing, because kids like to draw.
Sure.
You drew something, you were very happy with it, it was perfect in your eyes, and it didn't meet, if it didn't meet with the reaction of somebody, Mom, I loved it, I made this, and she went, oh, that's really pretty, and would that suddenly make it imperfect?
No, it was more internal. I had trouble just getting to the place where I was happy with it. And then that led to, I think, ultimately, like I said, seeking external reassurance, because I wasn't able to get there myself internally.
And were you seeking reassurance from, like, was it mostly family, or was it friends, or anybody that could listen?
I think anybody that could listen.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have specific memories. I mean, I was young. And again, as I got older, it manifested itself that I just started backing off from doing much of anything, because I was so overwhelmed by the thought of not doing it well.
No.
Yeah.
And then sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's sort of ironic because it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling thing. It affects your self-esteem, which isn't great, or, in the first place, because you're feeling like you're not perfect or things aren't going well, but then you start not doing anything at all. And in a school situation, that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Right. So then you start getting negative feedback from teachers and grown-ups, and then it becomes cyclical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you found out about your daughter and you started to see maybe OCD tendencies in your daughter, was it similar? Or was she having perfectionist issues? Or
that was part of it, but she exhibited what you might think of as sort of more classic symptoms. She had at one point developed a fear of vomiting, which affected how much she would eat, being able to go to restaurants, that sort of thing, because she was concerned that something would happen if we went to a restaurant, like food poisoning or that sort of thing. And she also sort of would, at a point would need to do a light switch multiple times on leaving a room. But that didn't happen right away. It started actually with just sort of intrusive thoughts about harm happening to either her mother or myself while she was at school. And that's when we started taking her to see someone. And it took some time to find the right therapist who was able to identify what was going on. And we did ultimately find somebody, and that's when the exposure therapy really began and that sort of thing.
Do you... because we have done, and we did a lot of exposures, and we still do, around the neighborhood that we live in Brooklyn. Did you have to do things outside, like school, or go to restaurants that she might have been afraid about food poisoning or things like that? What type of exposure therapy?
It was more focused on the vomiting itself. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit, things like started with like just looking at pictures of vomit or people vomiting, and then escalated up, got her near the experience from there to the point where she would actually, we'd have to have like faux vomit, and she would have to go and simulate doing it and dump it into the toilet.
Oh wow, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, it sort of, you started small and worked up from there, as it does.
I think the only two industries that might be enjoy talking about vomit is like the movie industry, horror movies, and OCD and therapy, because we did make vomit. I have a recipe for vomit, which is very funny, and you know all these ingredients that don't match. But then to take it a step further, which I've never done, and like simulate that is all right. So I know Vanessa's not watching. But Vanessa's not watching, but I know that that's some place where we're going to get to. If you're just joining in, we were just reading Unraveling Rose, a children's book about a bunny who has an issue with a thread that comes loose, and it's a book for kids. It kind of talks about OCD and talks about kind of being obsessed and focused on something and not being able to kind of realize why it's happening. And Brian just read it, and I just put a link in the comments where you can find it on Amazon, and I'm going to throw up a few more after this. But Brian also is a parent of a child with OCD, and he has OCD, so this is kind of all coming from a real place. Any last few things you want to kind of say about the book, or like where you're going to be at doing any readings, or where people can find you or find personal readings?
Absolutely. If you want to see more about the book, you can go to my personal website, which is www.authorbrianray, W-R-A-Y, all one word, .com. I'm going to be in Ohio next week doing a reading at an elementary school, which is really exciting. It's going to be a lot of students. And then the next day I'm going to be at a book fair in Cincinnati. The week after that I'll be in Naples, Florida doing a Meet the Author event at a Barnes & Noble. And I'll be on the local public radio speaking about OCD and the children's book prior to that event.
Oh, that's great. So folks in Ohio and folks in Florida, you'll be able to see Brian very soon. Thank you so much for joining. If you are watching this on replay and you have questions, feel free to throw them in there, and we'll keep answering them, because this is kind of gonna live on forever. But thank you so much for coming on and reading.
Thank you. I've been learning so much through this process, and I'm so excited by the work that you're doing, and I appreciate you inviting me to be a small part of it. Thank you.
Sure. We're I'm not sure what time it is, but we might do a quick reading on Instagram. So if you follow us there, we're going to do the same thing over there. But I hope you had a great OCD week, everybody, and keep it up, because it's not just a week; it's an entire year. Every day, if you can do a little something to kind of fight OCD and tell somebody else about it, don't give OCD power. Keep it to yourself. We'll talk to you soon.